What happened to this estate agent is like something off a horror film. It was the 22nd of January 1992. 25-year-old Stephanie Slater was working as an estate agent in Birmingham. On the day in question, she was doing a house viewing in Great Bar. She'd been asked to show a man called Bob around a house. During the appointment, however, she was attacked from behind. The man tied her up and blindfolded her, and during the terrifying ordeal, he gagged her and tied a rope around her neck. He dragged her down the stairs and forced her into his vehicle. He drove Stephanie to Newark and on the journey forced her to record a ransom message. Then he called the estate agents that Stephanie worked for and spoke to a man called Kevin Watts. He demanded a ransom sum and said that if he didn't pay, he was going to kill Stephanie. Kevin immediately alerted authorities and they raced to the address that Stephanie had been showing Bob round. They found blood at the scene and clumps of hair, but no sign of Stephanie. Meanwhile, the man took Stephanie into a warehouse where he AR'd her. However, the terrifying ordeal was far from over. He callously told Stephanie, "I hope you're not claustrophobic," before forcing her into a makeshift coffin with bricks on top. Not content with terrifying Stephanie into a hideously confined space, terrified for her life, he put bars up the legs of her trousers and told her they would give her electric shocks if she dared to move. He left her there overnight, and I can't imagine how terrifying that was. When he returned the next day, she was close to death. She was hypothermic, and he bizarrely took her out of the coffin and decided to make her a cup of tea. Once she'd warmed up a little bit, she tried to use the opportunity to make him feel a little bit guilty about keeping her prisoner by humanizing herself. They started chatting and getting on quite well, but he immediately switched up. He would play this game where he put her in the coffin, kept her in there, took her out, had a chat with her, put her back in, and kept her captive for 8 days. Meanwhile, police were working on trying to get the ransom money to Bob in the hopes that he would release her. They followed his instructions to drop the money off and planned to follow him afterwards. However, the instructions that Bob left were simply to put the money in a bag and drive off. Kevin did this with the money, put it in the bag, and left. After picking the money up, the kidnapper went back to the warehouse, and at this point he did something that nobody expected. He got Stephanie out of the coffin and said he was going to take her home, and he did just that. Her family were obviously absolutely overjoyed to have her back. In an effort to try and identify the kidnapper, Crime Watch broadcasted the small recording that they had of the kidnapper's voice. This was what they had collected from the phone calls that the kidnapper had made. Thankfully, this worked, and a woman rang up and stated that she knew that voice. It was her ex-husband. He was 51-year-old Michael Sams. Police arrested him without knowing that he was also responsible for a murder the year prior. Michael was given 4 life sentences for what he did to Stephanie, as well as for the killing of 18-year-old Julie Dart in 1991. I will be posting a video on Julie's case just after this one. Tragically, Stephanie passed away from cancer in 2017, but she did release a book about her ordeal called Beyond Fear, My Will to Survive. Michael remains in prison and is among the oldest and longest-serving life prisoners in England and Wales. He was nicknamed the One-Legged Killer and was controversially awarded £4,000 in damages when the prison service lost his artificial leg during a transfer. This teenager from Leeds was a victim of a murder that shocked the UK. It was the 9th of July 1991. Julie Dart was 18 years old and didn't have a lot of money, so she began working as an S-worker in a red light area in Leeds. A man named Michael Sams drove to the area from his home in Newark in Nottinghamshire. Michael was a 50-year-old divorcee who had a hideous plan for Julie when he pulled up by the side of her that evening. After she got into his car, terrifyingly he began to choke her. He blindfolded her and drove her to his warehouse. She had no idea where she was, and terrifyingly she was about to be forced into a makeshift coffin. He also forced her to write a ransom note demanding money for her safe return. He then left her in the coffin, and this gave her an opportunity. While he was away, she was fighting for her life, trying to escape, and did actually manage to do so. She didn't actually realise that Michael had an alarm system, so as soon as she was free, he raced back to the scene and recaptured her again. She begged Michael for her life, but he killed her. Now pretending that she was still alive, Michael continued with the ransom requests. He was demanding money from authorities, but never actually received any. It seemed like he was just doing this all for his own fun, just to confuse police. Less than 2 weeks after she was killed, Julie's body was discovered in a field in eastern Lincolnshire. Police were stumped and had no idea who the mystery killer was. That was until he would take another victim in 1992. It was in kidnapping estate agent Stephanie Slater that he would finally slip up and be brought to justice. I've already posted the incredible survival story of Stephanie Slater just before this video. Michael was eventually imprisoned for his crimes and remains in prison to this day. This is how Black Friday ended in a horrifying death. It was the early hours of Friday the 28th of November 2008. Over 2,000 people stood outside a Walmart in New York. Customers were lining up, eager to get some bargains as it was Black Friday. However, by 4:55 a.m, a frenzy had begun. The shoppers turned out of control. Workers and members of the public were trampled in the chaos as 6 to 10 employees tried to push people back out of the shop. Then suddenly, the glass doors shattered and the sea of people burst through. One employee, 34-year-old J.D. Mai Tai Demore, was crushed to death by frantic shoppers. Other workers were also injured as they tried to rescue him, and at least 4 other people, including a woman who was 8 months pregnant, were taken to hospital. Then shockingly, customers actually started to shout and protest when the police told them that they had to shut the shop due to a death. Customers started complaining due to how long they had to wait. Items on sale in the shop included a $700 Samsung 50-inch plasma TV and DVDs such as The Incredible Hulk for $9. The company said that it had tried to prepare for the crowd by taking on additional staff and hiring security. They had also said that they had put barriers up and consulted police. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to save the employee. This man very nearly got away with murder until he decided to strike again. It was the 15th of July 2010 and Norma Lopez was just a normal 17-year-old girl. She was a hard-working girl who loved dancing and fashion. She was attending summer school at Valley View High in California. On the day in question, she left her final class of the day and went to meet friends. She usually walked from school with her boyfriend, but on this occasion she was alone. She was on her way to her friend's house near the school. When she never turned up though, her friends were concerned. They decided to see if they could meet her on the way and they walked her route across a field towards the school. It was there that they made a worrying discovery. Norma's bag, a school binder and a broken earring were lying on the floor. Norma though was nowhere to be seen. They called police and a search began, but no luck. 5 days later, it was announced that there was a $35,000 reward for information leading to Norma's return. Tragically, this didn't help and just a few hours later, Norma's body was discovered. She was found deceased just over 2 miles away from where she had vanished. She was found with no clothes on from the waist up and her death was determined a homicide, but her cause of death was not determined. The hunt was on to find her killer, but it would actually take a year before a breakthrough. In the meantime, police tested DNA that they found on Norma's earring and it had no matches. That was until September 2011 when a match came through following a man being arrested on an unrelated charge. This was 42-year-old Jesse Perez Torres. They also found that his DNA was all over Norma's clothes too. He was arrested for the kidnap and murder of Norma. At his trial, it was revealed that he had randomly encountered the girl on her solo walk. He had been reportedly angry about his wife leaving him during that time. An anonymous woman also testified that he had attacked her too, dragging her into his car at knife point and R-ing her. He was found guilty and was given the death penalty. Did this mum save her children from a horrific attack, or was she a cold-blooded killer? It was the evening of the 13th of December 2001. Tracy Roberts was at home with her 3 children in Iowa. She would later tell police of the horrors of that evening. She said 2 men broke into her house while she was bathing her 1-year-old daughter. At this point, her husband was apparently out of town. She told police that she ran to her son Bert's room and gave him the baby before being pulled back. She said one of the intruders choked her until she became unconscious. Now, Bert apparently stayed in the bedroom guarding his 2 younger siblings and arming himself with a baseball bat. A short time later, when Tracy realised she had regained consciousness, she ran to her bedroom and apparently grabbed a weapon from a safe. She then fired her weapon at one of the men, causing him to collapse onto the bathroom floor. The other intruder apparently escaped. Now, Tracy's 11-year-old son, Bert Pittman, backed up his mum's story, but there were doubts. Investigators found Tracy's neighbour, 20-year-old Dustin Wade, dead in the home and began to analyse the scene. Interestingly, he'd been shot 9 times with 2 different guns. Tracy explained this by stating that her and her children were trying to get out of the house after she had shot the man, and they saw the person on the floor move, so she shot him again. She said in the frenzy and the panic, she'd grabbed a different weapon to do so. She then said when she found out the intruder was Dustin, she was devastated. She knew Dustin's family, and her husband Michael actually had apparently grown quite close with him. Police started looking into finding intruder number 2, who had seemingly got away, but with no luck. They then started to wonder if he even existed. Interestingly, nothing of value had been stolen from the house. The only thing that was found was an old computer, which had carefully been placed into Dustin's car, which was on the drive. A paramedic also stated that the marks found on Tracy's neck did not match with strangulation and seemed to be self-inflicted. Tracy's ex-husband John was looked into, as the pair were in the middle of a custody battle. To police, she painted a picture of an abusive ex who she alleged SA'd her son Bert. He denied this and claimed that Tracy was the one who was abusive to him, and that she'd even threatened him once with a gun. Then investigators turned their attention to Tracy's husband Michael. As I said, he'd had a close relationship with Dustin, but apparently had been physically abusive to Bert. He allegedly even broke his nose once during an argument. Michael denied this, but he did have a history of violence. He was arrested in December 2000 after an argument with Tracy. Tracy accused him of pushing her to the floor and making her hit her head. Michael claimed that Tracy once got him drunk and tried to suffocate him with a bag. Following all the accusations and counter-accusations, the pair divorced. The case went cold and Tracy moved to Nebraska with her children. Now, Dustin's mum remained incredibly frustrated about her son's death. To her, it didn't make any sense. Dustin considered Tracy a friend, and he also hadn't armed himself with any type of weapon going into the house. He'd also just kind of casually parked his car on the front drive. His mum's concern grew when she found out that he actually had been shot into the back of the head 4 times. This indicated that the shooting was not self-defense. The case was reopened in 2008, and there were more troubling revelations. The house hadn't been particularly dishevelled, and there were inconsistencies in Tracy's story. Many who knew her described her as manipulative and aggressive. Then there was the discovery of a notebook in Dustin's car. Dustin had seemingly written a strange tale about being contacted by John, who was Tracy's ex-husband. In the notebook, it said that John wanted Dustin to kill Tracy. However, there was something strange about this tale in the notebook. It gave very specific details about John that Dustin would never have known on his own. Investigators started to wonder whether Tracy had fed Dustin this information to write in the notebook on the night he was killed. They noticed that the language that was used in the notebook was almost identical to the language Tracy used to describe John. She was arrested and charged with Dustin's murder. It later came out that Tracy had asked Dustin to come to the house on his own sometimes to do paperwork for her. Police believed that maybe Tracy was just trying to use Dustin in order to frame her ex-husband and therefore win the custody battle. Tracy was eventually sentenced to life in prison. This teenager made friends with a lonely stranger, and he then killed her in the most horrific way. Karen Dewa was a 16-year-old girl from Fife. She was a talented dancer who was described as a likeable and kind girl. She was a family girl who spent a lot of time with her elderly nan. It was 2005, and 18-year-old Colin Evans from Wales had just moved over across the road. As I said, Karen was a really kind girl, and she wanted to make him feel welcome in the area. She befriended Colin, not having a clue what he was capable of. Now, Colin was no stranger to the police, and he was accused of at least 14 disturbing offences. This had been going on since he was 10 years old. One woman even reported him to police 40 separate times over stalking and harassing her young son. On one occasion, he tried to lure a young boy out of school by forging a note. Colin ended up becoming homeless and being placed in a homeless shelter in Fife. He continued stalking and harassing young children in the area. Frustratingly, he seemed to slip through the net, and police just didn't want to know. Then on the 20th of January 2005, after Karen and Colin had struck up a friendship, things turned incredibly dark. The pair had had an argument, and Karen reported Colin to police, not knowing her life was about to be in danger. Colin launched a vicious attack on the 16-year-old. He beat her, strangled her, and pulled her hair out. He dragged her down the stairs and then tried to dismember her body. He then stuffed her into a bin and set it on fire. His temporary accommodation was apparently covered in blood and hair. Unaware of the horrors that had taken place that evening, Karen's parents reported her missing. Tragically, the following morning, her charred remains were found. Police apprehended and charged Colin with her murder. He smirked through his court case and was given life with a minimum of 17 years. A woman obsessed with true crime murdered a stranger out of curiosity. Jung Jung is a 23-year-old woman from South Korea. In June 2023, she was arrested after something horrific came to light. Jung had posed as a mother on a tutoring app to lure a victim to her. She pretended to be a mother who was looking for an English tutor for her daughter. She contacted a total of 54 people before eventually picking a victim. The woman in question has not been publicly identified but is known to have been 26. She arrived at her home disguised as a young student. It's thought that her victim believed that she was a child due to her looking quite young and also her arriving in a school uniform. After being let in, she stabbed the young woman to death before leaving for the supermarket. There she bought cleaning supplies and bin bags and headed back. After returning to the house, she dismembered the young woman. She then got into a taxi carrying the woman's body parts and put them in a wooded area. The taxi driver sensed that there was something odd going on and reported this to police, who later found the body parts. They arrested Jung and she has since been convicted of murder. Investigators also found her internet search history included how to kill and ways to get rid of a body 4 months prior to the incident. The police stated that Jung had concocted the plan to catch the victim unawares and kill her out of curiosity. She had apparently had an unhealthy obsession with true crime books and shows. She has since been sentenced to life in prison. Imagine having a child with a man and a year later he decapitates you with a samurai sword. Karina Castro was a 27-year-old mother from California. She'd been in a relationship with Jose Landeta, aged 34, and had a 1-year-old daughter with him. She also had another daughter who was 7. The horrors would unfold on September the 8th, 2022, when police found a horrifying scene. Karina was found deceased in a street outside her home, and she had been decapitated with a samurai sword. Eyewitnesses had seen the pair in a heated argument before Jose went to his vehicle and pulled out a sword. Jose was arrested and the events that occurred were explored in a recent court case. The prosecution stated that Jose committed the murder to seek revenge, while the defence stated he was acting in self-defence and struggling with his mental health. The defence team claimed that Karina had attempted to stab Jose. However, there was very little evidence of this. There was no weapons ever recovered that were Karina's. They tried to claim that she had threatened his family and told him she had put a hit on his mum. The court was shown screenshots of some shocking arguments that Karina and Jose had over Snapchat and Instagram. In these messages, Karina was threatening to reveal that Jose had allegedly SA'd an underage girl. He sent her emojis of a ninja and blood and threatened to stop her seeing her daughter. Jose tried to plead not guilty due to insanity, but he was found guilty. He could get up to 26 years in prison. His wife vanished 2 years ago, and now he's charged with her murder. Deanne Warner was a 52-year-old mother of 5 from Michigan. She ran a truck company and farming business. She was last seen at her home in Franklin Township on the 25th of April 2021. Since vanishing, she's not been heard from or seen by friends or family. She's now been missing for over 2 years, and despite suspicions that she's been killed, her body has never been found. Now her husband Dale Warner has been charged with her murder. The 53-year-old is also facing charges of tampering with evidence. The pair had been married for 15 years when she vanished. He's believed to have pleaded not guilty to both charges, and his bond is set at $20 million. Dee's family have described not knowing what happened to their loved one as haunting. They obviously desperately need some sort of closure, and they have said they have resigned to the fact that she may well have been killed. A Subway worker was killed over an argument about too much mayonnaise. 26-year-old Brittany Macon was working at a Subway in Atlanta in June 2022. It was a normal day at work for her until a terrifying incident occurred. She was working with her colleague Jada Statham, who was 24 at the time, when a man named Melvin Williams entered the store. It's believed that after ordering food, an argument erupted between him and the employees over him having too much mayo on his sandwich. The store owner described how all hell broke loose. Brittany was shot and tragically died as a result. Jada's 5-year-old son was actually in the restaurant at the time and witnessed the whole hideous ordeal. Jada was shot, but thankfully she survived. Melvin is charged with murder and aggravated assault among other related charges. Thankfully, he is currently behind bars while he awaits his trial, which has not been yet scheduled. This girl vanished after seeing H in concert in Birmingham. What police found in a park the next day shocked the community. Keely Bunker from Tamworth in Staffordshire had only just celebrated her 20th birthday. 12 days later, she was going to see H in concert to continue the celebrations. It was the 19th of September 2019 and Keely and her friend attended the show. Afterwards, they headed to the nightclub Snobs. The girls were having a seemingly normal night out and were surrounded by friends. This included 20-year-old Wesley Street. Now, Keely and Wesley were actually childhood friends. They'd known each other since infant school, so this wasn't unusual. They headed back to Tamworth in a taxi after the night out, and Keely's friend Monique actually offered her to sleep over at her house. However, Keely replied quite chillingly, "I've got Wes, he'll walk me back, it'll be fine." That evening though, Keely would not be fine. She trusted Wesley to walk her home, but he took her on a detour. It's believed that he may have convinced her to go to the rugby club to have a smoke with him. When Keely failed to turn up for an interview the next day, her dad rang the police. Everyone knew that Wesley was the last person to have seen Keely, so the police questioned him. He claimed that they had walked home together and he'd last seen her by a phone box by his house. He gave police a detailed account of their route back and seemed like he wanted to help. Tragically, Keely's body was found at 9 p.m. that night, lying face down in a pool near the edge of Wigington Park. Wesley was arrested and tellingly, police noticed he had scratches on his face. GPS, DNA and CCTV evidence all proved that Wesley's account of what happened that night was a lie. CCTV captured the pair at Tamworth Rugby Club at 4:23 a.m. Keely's bag was found a short distance away. Wesley's jacket was found in the park with makeup all over the sleeves. His DNA was also found on Keely during a post-mortem, which proved he had SA'd her. He was found to have choked her to death before going home to bed. In court, he was also found guilty of 5 further S offences which took place in 2015, 2017 and 2019. He faces a minimum of 29 years in prison. A man did the unthinkable to a hospitalised child in Blackburn. It was the 15th of May 1948 in Lancashire. June Ann Devaney was just 3 years old when she was admitted to Queen's Park Hospital in Blackburn with pneumonia. She was under the care of nurse Gwendolyn Humphreys on the night in question. Now, little June had actually improved quite a lot and she was due to be discharged the next morning. Then, disturbingly, at around 1:20 a.m, while the nurse was preparing things in the back room, she felt a cold draft and noticed a door open. She went to see what was going on and was horrified when she saw one of the cots was empty. She then noticed something terrifying, a trail of adult footprints leading to the door. The nurse raised the alarm and contacted police. At 3:17 a.m, tragically they found the little child's body. She was face down in the grass not far from the ward. She was partially clothed with bloodstains on her body. The hospital immediately became a crime scene and a murder investigation began. The post-mortem found that the child had been AR'd and had teeth marks in her. A taxi driver reported to police that he had picked up a man with a local accent close to the hospital on the night of the crime. Now, the killer's fingerprints were actually found on a bottle next to June's cot. Over 46,000 sets of prints were tested against these until finally a match. The killer was Peter Griffiths, who eventually confessed. He pleaded guilty due to insanity and said he was drunk at the time and killed June in a fit of rage. He was found guilty of the crime and sentenced to death and was executed aged 22. This woman jumped off a top-floor balcony to escape her jealous boyfriend. 28-year-old Amy Beckley had been dating 28-year-old footballer Shaquille McDonald for about 6 weeks. Shaquille played professional football for clubs such as Derby County and Coventry. She said that in the first few weeks of them dating, he love-bombed her and showered her with affection. She was a single mum and really appreciated having someone looking after her and caring for her. However, she saw a completely different side to him when they were on a night out in March 2023. They'd been out in Arcadian in Birmingham when he accused her of speaking to a bouncer. He snatched her phone and keys and called her derogatory names and made her get in a taxi with him. In the taxi, he put her in a headlock, bit her, scratched her and slapped her. After they got home, CCTV captured him launching another vicious attack at her. He smashed her into a concrete wall, dragged her inside and strangled her repeatedly. She lost consciousness and he left the room, and when she came to, she tried to ring 999 on silent. However, she became so terrified of him that she jumped 14 foot from her top floor balcony to escape him. She broke both arms in doing so. Now, luckily her fall was broken slightly by a balcony below hers and someone had been outside having a cigarette at the time. They helped her inside and got her some help. Police arrived and Shaquille tried to flee but was detained. Amy was in an absolutely horrific state. You can see the images on Google if you want to go and look at those, but they are really shocking. Shaquille was jailed for just 2 years and 8 months after admitting to actual bodily harm and strangulation. This is the last picture of this woman alive. Minutes later, her husband did the unthinkable. Butterfly Valley in Muğla, Turkey is an incredibly popular beauty spot. In June 2018, Hakan Aysal was visiting the spot with his wife, 32-year-old Semra. The pair were expecting a child soon as Semra was 7 months pregnant. The cliff was actually 1,000 feet up and many tourists are enticed there with the lure of the beautiful views. However, little did she know, Semra had been lured there for an entirely different reason. Semra was actually afraid of heights, but Hakan convinced her that the trip to the cliff would pay off. Prior to the pair going on the holiday, Hakan had actually taken out life insurance for his wife. On the day in question, he lured her to the edge of the cliff to take a selfie. They'd actually been up there around 3 hours and Hakan had been waiting for the exact time to strike when nobody was watching. After taking the photo, he callously shoved his pregnant wife off the edge of the cliff, causing her to plummet to her death. A witness driving past was then flagged down by Hakan, who he described as completely calm. The man later stated, "I was driving there and I saw someone was waving at me and I stopped." Hakan came and said that his wife had fallen down the cliff. He said, "We immediately got out of the car and started looking for her, but we couldn't see where she would have landed from where we were." He then said, "We tried to get closer to the edge for a better look. Hakan did not come with us down there. He was not acting like a man whose wife had just fallen off a cliff." Photos of the couple were shared on the news and a tourist came forward to say that they had actually seen the pair too. They had noted that it was odd that the pair was scrambling down a very rocky area to get to the very edge. The pair were even captured on video by a tourist who had joked, "Either this man will throw the woman off or the woman will throw the man." Suspicions were raised further when Hakan tried to claim an insurance payout shortly after his wife's death. Hakan tried to claim insanity, but he was ordered to serve at least 30 years behind bars before he can appeal for release. This model was murdered in Croydon, and what her killer said in court will make your blood boil. Sally Ann Bowman was born in 1987 in Carshalton in South London. She had 3 sisters and was very talented and attended the Brit School for Performing Arts and Technology in Croydon. As you can see, she was very beautiful and she had dreams of becoming a professional model. After leaving school, she worked as a part-time hairdresser and tried to make it as a model. In 2005, she joined Pulse Model Agency. She actually became the face of Swatch watches. Her career was going from strength to strength and it looked like all her dreams were about to come true. That was until the 24th of September 2005. Sally was 18 at this point and was starting to go on nights out. On the night in question, she was out with her sister and a group of friends. They went to Lloyd's Bar in Croydon and stayed there until around 1 a.m. Now CCTV captured her leaving the bar and she waited around 15 minutes outside for a taxi. She then contacted her ex-boyfriend Lewis Sproston, who offered to pick her up. The pair initially broke up due to accusations of them both cheating. However, that night Lewis picked her up from Croydon town centre around 2:20 a.m. He drove her to her house in Beinheim Crescent. Unfortunately, in their car they got into another argument about the cheating rumours and Lewis actually sped off at around 4 a.m. as Sally got out of the car. Shortly after this, neighbours reportedly heard screaming but didn't actually go outside to see what was going on. Sally Ann lay outside having been stabbed in the neck and stomach. She was AR'd as she lay dead or dying. Her belongings were stolen, including her cardie, her bag and her phone. She was found deceased next to her home and police initially thought that Lewis was to blame. He was arrested and held for 4 days until finally DNA evidence eliminated him as a suspect. It wasn't until 9 months later this man was arrested. This was 35-year-old Croydon man Mark Dixie. Police had luckily managed to swab Mark 2 weeks earlier for having been involved in a brawl in a pub where he worked as a chef. The DNA they collected matched the DNA on Sally Ann. In court, Mark would admit to R-ing her after finding her on the ground outside her house. He denied murdering her though. Infuriatingly, he said he did not realise she was dead or dying when he found her. He was found guilty and sentenced to a minimum of 34 years. Frustratingly, it was actually then revealed that Mark was already a convicted serial S offender. He'd obviously been free to kill Sally Ann. He's unlikely to be considered for parole until at least 2040 when he's around 70. This is the moment right before this woman was fatally shot live on TV. Alison Parker was a budding young journalist from Martinsville, Virginia. She graduated from James Madison University, and in 2014 she started working on air. This was for the morning show of WDBJ7. It was early in the morning of the 26th of August 2015 when Alison and her cameraman, 27-year-old Adam Ward, were preparing for a broadcast. Alison had actually just celebrated her 24th birthday and she was getting back into the swing of work. The pair were due to cover the 50th anniversary of the Smith Mountain Lake. In the middle of a live interview, though, something horrific would take place. It was around 6:45 a.m. and during the live broadcast, a man in black approached. Terrifyingly, he was carrying a gun. Suddenly, he fired at Alison and he then turned the weapon onto Adam. He fired shots at the woman that was being interviewed, called Vicky Gardner. She actually thought quickly and played dead on the floor. Terrifyingly, the camera was still rolling and broadcasting to the horrified viewers at home as Alison and Adam lay dead. The gunman then fled the scene. The cameras were cut by the control room and the live feed cut back to the stunned journalists in the studio. They understandably could not process what had just happened. Police raced to the scene and Vicky was rushed to hospital and thankfully survived her gunshot wound. The other journalists at the news station thankfully actually recognised who the gunman was. They told police the shooter was Vester Flanagan. He'd actually previously worked for the news station until he was sacked for making staff feel uncomfortable. He had a history of being sacked from jobs due to bizarre behaviour and threatening people. It transpired that Vester had planned out his shooting in detail. He tweeted a confession shortly after and posted a video of the shooting to his Facebook. Police were obviously desperate to track him down, but before they could do so, he crashed his car and unalived himself. These are the heartbreaking final texts of a victim from the Pulse nightclub shooting. Pulse was one of the biggest nightclubs in Orlando, Florida. On the evening of the 11th of June 2016, they were hosting a Latin night. Pulse was a gay nightclub and they regularly had drag queens performing for the crowds. Around 2 a.m. of the morning of the 12th of June, an attack began. Suddenly, a man opened fire on around 300 people that were inside the venue. Initially, there was confusion and some people thought that it was firecrackers or part of the music. At 2:09, the club posted on Facebook, "Everyone get out of Pulse and keep running." The gunman had exchanged fire with a policeman at the door who was working that night. Now, Imran Yusuf, who was a veteran working as a bouncer, recognised the sound of gunfire. He jumped over a locked door where behind people were hiding in fear. He opened a latched door behind them, allowing around 70 people to escape. His quick thinking undoubtedly saved many lives. Police raced to the scene and a battle began inside which forced the gunman back. Terrifyingly, he took several hostage in the toilets at the back of the building. He warned police that he had explosives. During this time, terrified partygoers text loved ones to try and get help. 30-year-old accountant Eddie Justice sent these heartbreaking texts to his mum. At 2:45 a.m, the gunman, identified as Omar Mateen, called News 13 of Orlando. He announced that he was the shooter and he stated his reasons for doing so. Hostage negotiators were called in and police decided to storm the building at around 5 a.m. Dozens of people who had been cowering in another bathroom managed to flee before the gunman emerged. Another gunfight ensued between the gunman and police until they finally shot him dead. 49 people died and 58 were injured. At the time, it was the worst mass shooting in modern US history until 2017 when the Las Vegas shooting occurred. Do you notice anything odd about this last photo of this girl alive? It was 2012 and Alicia Bromfield from Illinois was 21 years old. She was a student at Western Illinois University, just one semester away from graduating. She was studying forensic psychology and criminal justice and was 6 months pregnant. She'd already picked the name Ava for her unborn baby girl. Now, although the father of the baby wasn't around, she was preparing for single motherhood. Little did she know, neither her nor her unborn child would survive much longer. 36-year-old Brian Cooper was Alicia's boss at Home Depot. The two seemed fairly close and sometimes met outside of work and walked Brian's dog. There was never anything romantic between them though. Brian was actually very abusive to Alicia. He would call her derogatory names in front of members of staff and shockingly even customers. He was even witnessed throwing things at her, but she felt that she had to stay in the job. She knew she was soon about to be a mother, so she was worried about the financial implications of not having a job. Brian continued to bully Alicia and make her life miserable. He would purposely make her work extra hours just so he could spend extra time with her. She actually started to report this to management, but nothing was ever done. In August 2012, he started pressuring her to attend his sister's wedding with him. She didn't want to go, but he threatened to sack her if she didn't. Her mum was really concerned about Alicia being forced to go to this wedding. Alicia reassured her, however, that she was simply going as a friend and that they'd be back the next day. Alicia's mum was comforted by the fact that Brian told Alicia they were going to be staying at the same hotel as the rest of the wedding party. This was the Sand Bay Resort in Wisconsin. However, this was a lie. On the 17th of August, the pair drove 4 hours to the hotel, and when they got there, Alicia realised that they weren't staying in the same hotel as everyone else. They got into an argument about this, and the argument escalated when Brian made sexual advances to Alicia. She told her mum on the phone that she was really fed up with how he was acting and that she'd lost her patience with him. She'd told Brian that they would go to the wedding together, but they would not remain friends afterwards. They went to the wedding together, and Brian got more and more drunk as the evening went on. Afterwards, they went back to the hotel and got into their separate beds for the evening. When Brian started harassing Alicia again, she again rejected him, and this time he launched a vicious attack. He dragged her to the ground and strangled her. She screamed out, "Think of the baby," but he didn't, and he killed her. He then arred her body as she lay deceased. The next morning, he showed up to a local petrol station and asked to use the phone. He rang police and admitted to intentionally killing her. He said, "I'm a good person besides what I did last night. Alicia's family is going to flip. Everyone is going to flip." Police raced to the scene and arrested him. They found Alicia's body nude in the hotel room with just a blanket covering her. It was later discovered that Brian had been so obsessed with Alicia that he'd actually been recording her with spy cameras. He was ultimately convicted of 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide and given 2 life sentences. To the outside world, these expectant parents had a picture-perfect life. What happened next would prove that that couldn't have been further from the truth. Joshua Hilberling was 23 years old. He'd been married to his wife Amber for around a year, and the pair lived in an apartment in Oklahoma. Now, Amber was 19, and the pair were known to have quite a volatile relationship and regularly get into arguments. Joshua's parents stated that Amber would abuse him throughout the relationship. He'd apparently even visited a domestic violence intervention service to seek help. Now, Joshua actually filed a protective order against Amber after an incident in which she hit him across the head with a lamp. It was so bad that he had to go to hospital and get stitches. Joshua reportedly wanted to leave Amber, but he felt trapped as she was 7 months pregnant with his child. The protective order was never finalised as the pair never turned up to court. On the 7th of June 2011, the pair had another one of their serious fights. This one, though, would be the last fight they would ever have. Shockingly, in the middle of a disagreement, Amber pushed Joshua out of their window of their 25th floor apartment. He fell to his death, and Amber was soon arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Amber's lawyers would argue that Joshua was the abuser in the relationship and that she pushed him in self-defense. Amber claimed that Joshua was kicked out of the US Air Force for substance abuse, and this is one factor that she said caused serious arguments between them. In court, though, a jury did find her guilty of second-degree murder and she got 25 years in prison. Amber gave birth to a baby boy and her family took over custody. On October the 26th, 2016, after Amber served 3 years in prison, she was found deceased in her cell. A coroner ruled that her death was a self-unaliving. This is the disturbing case of Robert Moan that stunned Scotland. Robert Moan was born in Dundee. He reportedly had a difficult upbringing and was abused by his dad throughout his childhood. He was bullied and ultimately was expelled from school. He served in the army and reportedly turned to alcohol to cope with depression. On the 1st of November 1967, Robert was 19 years old. He'd been drinking in a pub that day and decided to take revenge on the school that had expelled him. He was dressed in uniform and armed himself with a shotgun as he entered 26-year-old Nanette Hansen's class. It was a class of 11 girls aged between 14 and 15. Nanette was pregnant with her first child at this time. He subjected the students and their teacher to a 1.5-hour ordeal. He r'd one girl and SA'd another before brave Nanette convinced him to let the girls go. However, before doing so, he made Nanette turn around and shot her in the back. She died on her way to hospital. After the murder, Robert was deemed insane in the High Court in Dundee and was ordered to be detained without limit at the state hospital. However, that would not be the end of Robert's crimes. In 1976, he broke out of Carstairs Hospital with fellow inmate and lover Thomas McCulloch. They had plotted the escape for ages, collecting weapons to help them do so. During their bid for freedom, they murdered another inmate and a male nurse and also killed a police officer before eventually being recaptured. Robert's partner in crime, Thomas, was released in 2013 and is believed to be living in Dundee now. Robert's in his 70s and remains in prison, and he is Scotland's longest-serving prisoner. This is the heartbreaking final request this girl made before she was brutally killed. It was 2008 and Eve Carson was 22 years old. She was living in North Carolina and was a student at the university. She was incredibly passionate about helping others and participated in many organisations, including a hunger relief organisation. In the early hours of the morning on March the 5th, 2008, things would take a very dark turn. Lawrence Lovett, aged 20, had an extensive criminal background. On the night in question, he rang one of his friends called Jason and asked him to drive him and his friend to Chapel Hill to rob someone. Jason actually declined this, so Lawrence and his friend Demario Atwater went on their way to find a victim. At around 3:30 a.m, Eve had actually been going to her car to get something. At this point, the pair decided to strike. They forced their way into her car and held her at gunpoint. They took her to some cash machines and forced her to take out money for them. She tried to reason with the men and just say, you've taken my money, now please just let me go. However, they showed no mercy and decided they had to kill her because she'd seen their faces. They drove her to a wooded area and, heartbreakingly, it seemed like Eve realised what was about to happen. Upsettingly, she asked the pair to pray with her. They then callously shot her 5 times. Locals in the area reported to police that they had heard gunshots. Eve's body was found shortly after, and it wasn't long before police started scouring CCTV. Police identified the killers and they were sentenced to life in prison. Morgan Martin was 4 months pregnant when she vanished. It was the 25th of July 2012 and she was 17. She told family and friends that the father of the baby was Jacoby Flowers, aged 24. Morgan was actually looking forward to being a mum despite her young age, and she was excited for the future. Knowing this, her parents were immediately concerned when she vanished. They just knew she wouldn't have left of her own accord. On the evening in question, she left her home in Tampa just after midnight. She was actually wearing pajamas at the time and had just stepped off her porch to apparently show the sonogram to the father of the baby. She seemed like she would just be a couple of minutes and then would return home. So when she failed to come back, her mum was really worried. Her purse and sonogram photo were both left behind. Police got involved and questioned Jacoby. He denied knowing anything and also denied having anything to do with Morgan. He said he wasn't the father to her unborn child, they were just acquaintances and they'd never even been intimate. Morgan's family and friends were obviously really suspicious of him, but police just didn't have any grounds to arrest him. Frustratingly, Morgan's case went cold and she was never heard from again. Throughout the years, police re-interviewed people and looked over old evidence. Now, Jacoby's story changed when police showed him text messages that proved he had in fact been intimate with Morgan. He then decided to say that he'd actually begged Morgan to get rid of the pregnancy, that he was concerned about being potentially in trouble with police because she was a minor. He also apparently already had 3 children and was concerned about how it would affect his current relationship to have a new baby. In 2016, he was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Finally, in 2022, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder because of a plea agreement. He was given just 25 years in prison in exchange for the location of Morgan's remains. If the remains weren't found, he was due to spend 40 years behind bars. He told police where Morgan's remains were, but they weren't found. Now, it's not clear whether he lied about this or whether the wildlife had kind of just taken the remains away over the years. He was given the full 40 years in prison because of this, and Morgan has still never been found. This is one of the most shocking love triangle murders I've ever heard. Erin Corwin was only 19 years old, living in California. She was married to US Marine Jonathan, and the pair were childhood sweethearts. They'd met when they were in middle school and even got engaged when they were in high school. They got married in 2012, and a year later, Jonathan was stationed in California with the Marines. They moved to 29 Palms and seemed happy. Things actually worked out well at first, and they met another couple that was stationed on the military base. The pair in question were Nicole and Christopher Lee. They had a similar story. They were childhood sweethearts, but they did actually have a 6-year-old daughter. The couples grew close, and Erin would babysit for their daughter occasionally. Things seemed to be going well, but behind closed doors, Erin and Christopher had started an affair. Jonathan actually found out about this and was understandably very upset. Erin convinced him that she would end things and it was just a one-off and it would not happen again. Jonathan gave her the benefit of the doubt, but unfortunately Erin did continue the affair. By June 2014, things got very complicated indeed. Erin was pregnant. To make matters worse, she was convinced that the baby was Christopher's and not Jonathan's. Erin was strangely excited about this and she seemed to want a future with Christopher despite the fact that they were both married to different people. On the 28th of June that year, Christopher invited Erin hiking at Joshua Tree State Park. He told her he had a surprise for her and she thought he might propose. She lied to Jonathan about where she was going and met up with Christopher to start the hike. Unfortunately, the surprise was not what Erin had hoped. Christopher would strangle Erin to death during the meet and threw her down a mine shaft. Jonathan was obviously worried when she didn't come home that night and he reported this to police. Investigators got involved and quickly found out about the affair, so they questioned Christopher. He denied having anything to do with the disappearance. Tellingly, just days later, he left the Marines and then moved to Alaska with his wife and daughter. Meanwhile, police were examining tyre tracks in the area where Erin's car had been found. The tracks matched Christopher's vehicle. A month or so later, Erin's body was also discovered. Christopher was arrested and pleaded not guilty. He admitted to the murder but claimed it was not premeditated. He claimed that Erin had confessed to him that she had SA'd his daughter. He said he flew into a rage and killed her. The jury did not believe this story and he was sentenced to life in prison. Imagine getting stood up for a day and it causes you to become a key part of a murder trial. It was 2012 in Kentucky and Shayna Hubers was 21 years old. She had just graduated from the University of Kentucky and was dating 29-year-old Ryan Poston. Ryan was an attorney and the pair were said to be very toxic. They'd been together for about a year and a half but were very on and off. On the night of October the 12th, things would end for good. Those close to Ryan knew he wasn't happy. He tried ending things with Shayna multiple times, but she refused to accept this. She would turn up to his house, refuse to leave, and they would end up getting back together. On the 12th of October, the pair were having food at Ryan's parents' house, and they would end up in another argument. Ryan decided to end things once and for all, and to prove to Shayna that he was over her, he decided to go on a date with another woman the next night. The woman was the stunning Audrey Bolt, who was the current Miss Ohio. Audrey and Ryan had arranged to go to a bar the night after at 9:30 p.m. Audrey was really looking forward to it and was very confused when he never showed up. Meanwhile, Shayna had turned up to Ryan's house again without warning. After another massive argument, she took one of his guns and shot him 6 times. She then decided to call police to confess. Now, while she was being interviewed by police, she was acting incredibly bizarre. She twirled around the room and sang, "I did it, yeah, I killed him." She also sang Amazing Grace. Shayna tried to claim that she acted in self-defense, but she was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Audrey had to testify in the murder trial. However, in August 2016, Shayna was actually granted a new trial. This was because it was revealed that one of the original jurors was actually a felon. She was again found guilty though in her retrial and was sentenced to life. This teenager from Wiltshire had no idea that breaking up with her boyfriend was going to cost her her life. Ellie Gould was a 17-year-old student at a school in Chippenham. She was a bright girl and planned to soon go to university. It was May 2019 and Ellie had ended her relationship with 17-year-old Thomas Griffiths. Thomas refused to accept the fact that Ellie no longer wanted to be with him and decided to do the unthinkable. On the 3rd of May, Thomas emailed his teachers to say that he would not be in school that day and got the bus back home. He then took his mum's car and drove to Ellie's home where he would launch a vicious attack. He stabbed her at least 13 times in the face and the neck and then tried to stage the scene so that it looked like a self-unaliving. He put her hand around the handle of the knife to make it look like she'd done it of her own accord. Now in the struggle, as you can see from this harrowing image, Ellie had desperately tried to fight for her life. She had scratched Thomas's face in a desperate attempt to defend herself, which left him with marks all over his face. Thomas knew that he needed to come up with a cover story. He messaged his friend on Snapchat to say that he'd been struggling mentally and scratching his own neck quite hard in order to account for his injuries. When Ellie's dad got home later that day after work, he had no idea what he was about to walk into. He found his daughter in the kitchen lying in a pool of her blood. Now, due to their recent breakup, Thomas was the obvious suspect and he was arrested. He pleaded guilty in court but got just 12 years in prison due to his age. Ellie's family is obviously understandably really upset by this. Since Ellie's death, her mum Carol has been campaigning to try and get tougher sentences for domestic murders.